Yes,
right.
we will examine the role of professional enablers and with 4, I have killed 1 item here in the summary in the index with 4 chapters or 5, I'd say. The problem usually is believed to be cash, which is totally wrong. It's a cliche. And then we'll examine what looting does and what looting does not, in fact. We will come back to the cash issue and the non-cash issue and examine the role of professional enablers, who they are and what they do. And I will give you a handful of proposals if you accept. So cash is believed to be the main problem. We're talking of Africa, cash circulation. We see increase in cash deterrent. We see also cash being accepted or believed to be the source of the problem. We will examine how it's not the case. Next, please. So in Africa, we have a cash issue, and sometimes cash is believed to be the main vector or the main vehicle for financial crime, which is wrong. I take here the example of disappearance of $300,000 in cash, and the explanation of the authorities were that a gang of monkeys and a snake took away 30 large bunches of cash, and that the snake swallowed part of it. It explained, or by giving a caricature, a cliche, that cash has a limited amount of for its relation to illicit financial flows. Next. Non-cash are a 98% of transaction from the continent to the continent and within the continent. And a group of a think tank established in the US has established, they are economists and statisticians mainly, that 90 billion of IFF, illicit financial flows, disappear from Africa electronically every year. $90 billion of illicit financial flows disappear electronically via transaction, an electronic transaction or remittance, cash remittance. Cash remittance is a fact, an electronic remittance, and you know that when you pay a cash remittance in Italy to be paid in Nigeria, there is no cash transfer, it's only electronic. Yeah? So this amount of money and this share of money is in fact electronic transaction, and we have good reason to believe that if it is electronic, it can be easily monitored or deterred if it's illicit. Next. So 90 billion a year, that's the cost for 450 hospitals every year. Or that's the cost of 10,000 nurses during 3,000 years. So you see the amount of cash, money, disappearing every year, not only from public coffer, but also from private enterprises and from individuals every year, going to other destinations, mainly Asia today, mainly what we call West Asia, which is in fact the Gulf area in the Middle East. Next. So we'll kill the cliche rapidly, and we'll examine how is it possible that 90 billion leave electronically the continent every year. Next. So we'll try to understand who these professional enablers or what the root cause of these illicit financial flows are. I don't have a clear opinion on that. I don't want to interfere. So people believe they are voters, oligarchies, autocrats, the systems, the disconnect from the elites. Some blame the former colonial powers or the banks or the regulator. Some also point in the direction of a criminal justice system, or some accuse the trade-free zone. Let's move ahead. Let's see what we know. I will give you 3 study cases. One is the case of Isabella dos Santos, the daughter of the president of Angola, former president. I will give you the case of TSKJ joint venture in Nigeria, comprising of several oil and gas companies, Technip, French and American, some Progeti, Netherlands, Kellogg's Brown, KBR, that's the US, and the Japan corporation. Isabella dos Santos, the main enablers, she's allegedly stole several billions of dollars, and we are now about, we've reached 7 billion for sure. That has been evaluated by the criminal justice system, but it's believed to be more. We have also identified several foreign banks and local banks facilitating the transfer of illicit flows. She did not carry cash. She used the banking system. And she did not herself use the banking system. Her lawyers did, and mainly 5 big 4 companies, namely KPMG, PwC, Boston Consulting Group, EY, and another, have contributed to facilitate the illicit transfer of state funds, also private enterprises fund, to foreign countries, mainly the Netherlands, Portugal, UK, and the Gulf area, the Emirates. So these 5 big 4 knew that these funds were illicitly transferred or legally transferred to other banks. But they had created empty shells of companies to receive the funds. And they created that with the help of lawyers. Lawyers were based in Angola, in Portugal, in France, in the UK, and also in what we call weak judicial capacity jurisdiction. They are weak because they have designed their fiscal system to be weak. I'm talking of Cayman Island, Jersey, Man, Gibraltar, Hong Kong, and other countries like Macau. So you see, there were at least a group of 10 professional enablers in the case of Isabella dos Santos looting Angola. In the TSKJ joint venture in Nigeria, that was a project in the Delta region for oil and gas, mainly liquefied petroleum gas. We have identified 26 companies that were empty shells created for the sole purpose of receiving illicit funds. And we have also identified 6 foreign banks: France, UK, mainly US, and also, as I've indicated, offshore places. We call them offshore because they are usually islands. Offshore places where these banks were operating. And these 5 companies, these 4 companies, the Technip, the KBR, and some Progeti and Marubeni, were using these 26 other companies through lawyers and through accounting firms, as well as the 6 banks, to loot the project. Some of the commissions paid to a facilitator, or a main facilitator in the Netherlands, an American guy, were in the tune of $135 million US. In the Zuma case, in the Jacob Zuma case with Gupta family, we have here a situation of state capture where the Gupta family, it's a criminal gang of businessmen, have captured the state by influencing the president and his entourage to loot public funds and divert them to their own bank, Barodi Bank in India. And they've done that through a series of companies in South Africa, including KPMG. KPMG has been barred from operating in South Africa as a result to the Gupta family looting with the complicity of Jacob Zuma, the public funds. KPMG is now banned from operating a branch of their activity or a part of activity in Angola. So we know who these professional enablers are. We know what they do and what they were not supposed to do. Next. So this is an analysis by OECD, the international organization based in Paris, about situation and vehicles facilitating or enabling the flows of illicit funds. So this was published 10 years ago. If I show you what was published 20 years ago, it's exactly the same. So if you see, we have a list here in paragraph 3, in section 3, of all professional enablers, mainly corporate vehicles and trusts. So this goes through companies registering corporate vehicles and trusts, mainly law firms, but not only. Gatekeepers, this is a definition that is a OECD definition. Mainly, they want to point in the direction of the big four company consulting groups here. Domestic financial institution, the local banking system in Africa, offshore or foreign jurisdiction. So we've seen that some of the banks are purely European banks, some are offshore banks in poorly enforced jurisdiction. Use of nominees, so this is a critical point. Usually they use beneficial owners who are not the right beneficial owners, who are completely hidden in the case of trust. And use of cash. They insist on the use of cash. In the 3 cases I've indicated, there is no use of cash. Everything.
Sorry to interrupt you, just to let you know, just a few minutes left. Sorry.
Yes, I'm almost finished. Okay. So this addresses 4 issues: ABCD, control over the state, the capture of the financial institution by financial crime, the poor due diligence on the companies and the beneficial owners, and of course, no communication between states intra-Africa, but also with other continents. Next. So I've made 7 proposals for you to take away. Next. 2 are individual solutions. 1, Africans should register and vote where there are elections. There should also decline corruption and transgression where it's possible. We see in some countries high tolerance to transgression. This is the case in the UK, in Monaco, in Italy, in France, but not only in Africa as well. We see the case in Morocco, in Nigeria, and South Africa, and Kenya. We should hold government accountable. I've indicated that I am not able to answer that question because this role should be placed by international organization usually. Citizen media, I have indicated 3 countries, Nigeria, South Africa, and Burkina Faso, where we have citizen media. This works efficiently. Citizen media challenges the state of affairs with regards to illicit financial flows. And this works. I have investigative journalism works well. Digital banking, we know digital banking is very effective in Rwanda and Kenya. It's also moving ahead extremely well in West Africa, less in Southern Africa and less in Northern Africa. We see also lawsuit working well, lawsuits abroad usually. Egypt has sued some of its leaders in Europe. Nigeria did the same. It works very efficiently. Some of them had their assets frozen and seized, and the assets were repatriated to the origin countries. And now I've taken the last one, which is the most controversial, which is the effective control over the police and the justice. Because voting is not only the effective solution, we also need a check and balances situation. I know that in Kenya, the civil society has engaged on this track, but it's also supposed to be the role played by the lawsuit, by the citizen media, by the international organization, and by the individual. This is why I have put some question mark there to challenge the situation. This is it. Next, and then I am over with the matter. Africa has the capacity to transform, self-transform. Goodwill and intention are not enough. We see a lot of conferences on organized crime and illicit financial flows. Name and shame works well. Illicit asset seizures work well. Citizen-based media works well. Anti-corruption platform, we've seen them in Nigeria and South Africa and in Kenya, it works well. And digital communication, for sure, it works very well. Finally, there is no need to trust UN, World Bank, IMF, or the African Union to solve African problem, because they merely contribute to worsening the situation. So thank you very much for your attention. And please, the floor is open for questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Gaylor. I think what we'll do is that we will bring in our next two speakers, and then I actually have quite a few questions coming in. I've listed them, but once we finish with all the speakers, I will be putting these questions to you and potentially to other speakers. Thank you so much for this presentation, which was insightful. Our next speaker today is Dr. Jared Oniyari, who will be speaking to us on the state of governance in Africa. Professor Dr. Jared Oniyari is a trained lay chaplain and a certified professional mediator and environmental impact assessment lead expert. He's part-time lecturer at the Management University of Africa, and he's also Chancellor Liaison at United Graduate College and Seminary International. He's also the chairman of the Board of Trustees at the Jacobs Abbey Global Institute for Leadership Studies. Dr. Oniyari was the 2020 Kenya World Civility Icon and president of several organizations. I will list a few, including the Peace Society of Kenya, Association for Conflict Resolution in Kenya, and the Association of Chaplains and Counselors Kenya. He's furthermore the ambassador for International Human Rights Peace Commission in Kenya, and has a background in business development studies, and he's a PhD candidate at Kisii University, pursuing a PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies, I believe, if that's correct. Dr. Oniyari, thank you for joining us today. May I welcome you to take the floor and start your presentation on the state of governance in Africa today. As I've said with our previous speaker, I will interrupt you kindly to let you know that you've reached the end, so you can wrap up your comments and your presentation. Dr. Oniyari, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Christophe, for that elaborate introduction. And I want to assure you that you will not interrupt me, because I will finish on time. And if I don't finish in time, the discussion will be very interesting.
All right.
You have given me a simple task of talking about the state of governance in Africa.
Yes. And
perhaps I will start by defining what's governance, because I cannot be able to talk about governance unless my audience and the people listening to me are able to understand what governance is. And many scholars have defined governance, but I want to see it as structures and the processes that are designed to ensure accountability, transparency, responsiveness, rule of law, stability, equity, inclusiveness, that's inclusivity, empowerment, broadened participation of the people, which is aimed at informing, involving them, and consulting them with the ultimate goal of reaching a consensus and agreeing to move forward. Then let me just be very honest to look at the founding fathers of the continent of Africa. What were they focused on? They were focused on to ensure that there is total independence of all African states. We were able to struggle from our colonial masters who are keeping our money from what the previous speakers has kept, or the money which has been looted from the continent of Africa. It is not in Africa, but it's in the outside continent. Except one last colony in Africa, Morocco, which has occupied Western Sahara. And the Western Sahara is the last colony in Africa. And the African people should not rest until the Sahrawi people have gotten their independence and have gotten the opportunity, as enshrined in the United Nations Security Council, with many resolutions that give them an opportunity to self-determine on how they want to be governed. After having said that, let me just pose questions, because 8 minutes, honestly, is not enough. But let me just pose questions as per the divination. So then we can be able to reach a consensus whether what is the state of governance in the continent of Africa. Let me just ask my audience, is there accountability in the continent of Africa from our leaders? Is there transparency in the continent of Africa from our leaders? Is there responsiveness? Are they responsible? Do the people that are governing the continent of Africa, do you see it? Is there rule of law? Is there stability? This in the continent of Africa. And if I may reach this point to just posing, Somalia for the last 30 years has been a very state. As recent as it was, you saw the people of Chad killing their president. During the rising of the Arab rising in the Northern Africa, the Northern African countries are not stable. As I speak today, look at Democratic Republic of Congo, the country which God has blessed with all the resources, minerals, diamonds, with the hardwoods which have never been utilized up now. Is there peace? Who is ensuring that there is no peace in that country? Look what's happening in Mozambique, at the Delgado region. We are seeing terrorism. Look at the terrorism in East Africa. Kenya has been a victim because of Al-Shabaab. Look at the Boko Haram in the Saharan region. Are the women and the children of African secure? We have had young children and women being abducted by the Boko Haram. I have said that the founding fathers of the continent of Africa were focused to ensure that there is peace and security. Will you see it in the Saharan region? Will you see the youngest country, Southern Sudan, which got its independence? Who has interfered with their peace? Are you seeing peace in Ethiopia, the Greece platform, the Greece? I will go on and ask, is there inclusivity? Is there equality? Is there gender equality in the continent of Africa? Is there fairness? Are the people of Africa empowered? Is there broadened participation of the people? I will go on and go on. If the answer to that is yes, then that is the state of governance in the continent of Africa. And if the answer is no, that is the state of governance. What do you see in the continent of Africa, my listeners, is I can see corruption and the plunder of the public resources. I could see violation of human rights. I could see rigging and corruption at its peak. I could see violation of extreme violation of human rights. I can see extreme poverty. I could see anger. I could see terrorism. I've just touched on in passing. I could see ethnic conflict. I could see religious conflict. Do you see serious diseases outbreak? How have we managed even to handle the corona pandemic? Were we prepared? Are we in a panic? Have we been vaccinated our people? That is the state of governance. Do you see social inequality in Africa? Do you see chronic and incurable unemployment? That is the state of governance in the continent of Africa. Is it designed? Is it worked on? So as a way forward, as a way forward of what I've said. My dear African brothers, it is high time we stop agonizing. We were colonized. Our resources are being plundered. There is all this and that. That is happening. But it's high time we start organizing. And a conversation like this, we are organizing in Africa. We must look towards inclusivity. We must go for it. We must have shared prosperity. We must work towards respect of human rights from our leaders. We must be able to demand. We must be able to go for periodic and regular elections, not like the case in Sudan, in Somalia, where President Vamajo, he knew his time is over and he wanted to extend. I thank the United Nations and Africa Union standing firm and saying, no, let the people of Somalia decide who are going to be their leaders. May we be able to address poverty. May we be able to address corruption and detest it in its entirety. And let me just conclude by saying this. And I want to quote Professor Wangari Maathai. When she was receiving her Nobel Prize, she talked about the forest which was burning, and that's where I am going to stop. When the fire broke out in the forest, all the animals came out. You can see the big five, the elephant, the buffalo, the giraffe, the lions, and all of them, even the king of the jungle. But the small hummingbird, it went to the river several times to try to bring water and quench the fire. But it did not manage to bring it out. But it at least did something. May the African people who are listening to me, may the African people who are living in the diaspora ensure that where your umbilical cord was cut is in the continent of Africa, that where much is done. It is until the African leaders, the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, and many others whom I can name and name, when they had an opportunity to go to the West, it is when they came back and said the colonial people must go. May you come back in Africa and join up and team up. That you not have the cash transfer you are doing to the continent of Africa. You must come back and ensure that the right things is done. A continent with 1.2 billion people, it must have 1.2 billion solutions. A continent with precious minerals, a continent with good climate, a continent with young people. We must be able to address good governance. I will go on and on. May you allow me to submit and stop. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Oniyari. Thank you for the passion also with the comments. We definitely need that, and I think it makes your points all the more impactful. So thank you for this, and I will surely call upon you during a Q&A session later. This would be a good time for me to remind the attendees and also other panelists that you can use the Q&A function. We are getting some questions in the chat, but for the benefit of everyone, can you please put them through the Q&A if you have any, and also don't forget to address and precise who you're addressing the question to, whether it's a specific speaker or perhaps the whole panel. And so it is time for me to bring in our last speaker for the day and for this session, Dr. Collins Nzuko, who is a Nigerian-born but Belgian politician of the Green Party. He was just sworn in for a third term of office in January 2019, I believe, as Councillor for Social Affairs in the government of the mayor of the Ostend City Council in West Flanders. He is the first non-Belgian person to be elected to political office in West Flanders, which is notable. Dr. Nzuko is particularly active in matters of social welfare, economy, international development, and diversity. He has served as the chief executive and chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora in Europe. He's also the founder of Global Village Consult, which is brand owners of Nigerian human capital. Dr. Nzuko has been active in consultancy and advocacy in the field of socioeconomic development for Nigeria and for Africa in general. And he's a contributor to several Africa-centric media on global affairs and foreign policy. He currently also serves on the board of Belgium, Luxembourg, Nigeria Chamber of Commerce as direct development. Dr. Nweke, thank you for joining us today. Your presentation and contribution to this panel will be on youth population as an asset or liability for productive and consumptive Africa. For the previous speakers, sorry, I will be giving you 8 minutes to take the floor. I will try and interrupt you around 7 minutes to let you know that you need to wrap up your comments. Thank you very much for joining us. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Crystal. I'm happy to be here. I hope I can be heard, right?
You can be heard. We can hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. I will unfortunately not be speaking with the same passion as Professor Oniyari, but I believe I would have to make a very, a few critical points that will essentially get us thinking. I will start by actually going through very, very briefly, considering the short time that we have. And by the way, my presentation will be available afterwards for those who will be interested. Now, in talking about population growth, youth population growth in Africa, I think it's important to, first and foremost, look at what the literature review on Africa today, is talking about all over the world, especially, from the Western Hemisphere. When you read about Africa, most of the time, you will find, statements to the effect of perennial prevalence of conflicts. You will read about Africa in the light of interstate and intrastate, conflict situations. You will be reading about decaying and decayed infrastructure. Trade deficit is one of those, things that you will come across when you read about Africa, balance of trade issues, high unemployment, especially amongst, the youth of the continent, and then astronomical poverty, and a whole, a host of other issues. Now, one other issue, which is the one that I'll be talking to you about, that is actually making the rounds, that isn't getting the kind of attention that it needs to get, because actually it touches on the heart of Africa going forward. That is, youth population. Every study you read actually tells you that youth population in Africa is actually exploding. The population growth is exploding. And that is a statement of fact, and very shortly I'll be taking you through, some of the figures that are available, officially confirmed figures. So yes, that's a statement of fact, but I think so far the analysis out there has always looked at youth population as something very, very negative. Of course, there are cause for worries. There are things that should give us concern about Africa and its, growing population. But there are also a number of, advantages that play in favor of Africa and the Africa that, all of us would want to see in terms of youth population being an asset. But very little is talked about it. Not very much information is out there, and I think a forum such as this gives an opportunity to shine the light a little bit on some of those advantages that come with population growth that is not very much talked about. And I will be handing down a number of points to form the basis for us to have a debate here, but also continue the conversation going forward. Now, just a bit of information that you can use, in building our case. The state of play on population growth in Africa, as we have it today, is that world population will reach approximately 10 billion by 2050. And that will be, you know, an increment of 2.3 billion or 29% from an estimated 7.6 billion people now, according to a population reference bureau, that's PRB, that was conducted actually, I believe in 2018. So essentially what's the point that is being made is that the previous projection that was made, there is always this tendency of, you know, making projections every 50 years. The projection that was made in 2018 turns out not to be accurate. Well, some factors affected it, and so with some adaptations, it now turned out that the projection is going to be 2.3 billion short of what was initially projected. And it is also estimated that by that 2050, going by the current trend, you know, the growth trend, it is projected that 58% of global population will reside in Africa by that date. Now, like I said, this gives you know, some cause of concern from some quarters, but of course we'll look at why it shouldn't really be much of you know, a concern to everyone. Because the time is short, I'm going to you know, dive straight into what people are saying on the flip side, but also on the negative side of population growth. Now, again, because of time, I will kind of integrate what they are saying, but also what they are not telling us. Let us start with you know, pressure on land mass. It has been argued, especially promoted by the Western media, that population growth in Africa will put a lot of pressure on African or even global landmass, because we will come to a point where there will be more people on Earth and less space for them to live in. Now, as far as maybe for some parts of the world, it could be correct, but specifically on Africa, well, curiously, one of the Chinese officials that opposed as a businessman that you know, did an exploration in Africa very recently, actually came to the conclusion that 80% of open spaces in the world today actually resides in Africa. So what that means is that Africa has 80% of global land mass, whereas the rest of the world shares 20%. So that speaks to you know, the fact that the argument around the land space, you know, land mass, isn't quite something that cuts wood. Now, people also talk about poverty as one of the downsides of huge population. Yes, we are having it already in Africa, but we need to be, you know, very careful about one thing. Africa and Africans aren't quite poor. It is the leadership of Africa that is poor that has actually created the impression. But of course, people on, you know, on the ground actually feel the poverty because resources are not well managed. There is enough resources in Africa to cater for Africa's population in 2050, for example, when the global population, the world population would have been 10 billion. Now, they also talk about population, and I'm happy that, sorry, pollution. I'm happy that Professor Oniyari actually mentioned the, you know, groundbreaking work that was done by late Untitled, where we do know that little bits of actions taken to mitigate, you know, population devastation, they are there. They are not rocket science. And come to think of it, as of today, Africa is not the greatest polluter. And, you know, we hear things like people should, you know, jettison the use of firewood without necessarily giving them the alternative to firewood because it pollutes. Now, on that as well, I have to say that, I mean, innovations are everywhere and they can only get better. So pollution as one of the downsides of, you know, population growth in Africa, again, doesn't cut wood. People also talk about conflicts and war. The more people you have, you know, the more interactions, you know, the more conflicts that you have. Well, that is one-sided story. The reason it's one-sided story is that if Africa is able to get its acts together and begin to mitigate, you know, conflicts, begin to interact more in positive sense, and of course, you know, begin to reject the weapons that are manufactured specifically for them, and, you know, incite them against you know, one another, and then sell these weapons to them. I believe that population growth in Africa, you know, as part of the causes of conflicts and war in the future, I believe that that will be mitigated as well. Now, those are some of what you know, people are saying. Now, I want to very quickly, in wrapping up for now.
Thank you.
I want to very quickly mention one of the posts from Jean-Louis Guérin, where he said that cash is the issue actually constitutes cliche when he was discussing financial flow. Well, he said, kill the cliche. I believe that you know, Africa has come to a point where killing the cliche about population growth should constitute a major task for Africans through good governance and the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nweke, and sorry for interrupting. So now that we've had our three speakers contribute, and I think it's time for us to entertain the Q&A, and I think I will revert to our first speaker, Mr. Gaillard, if you are still around.
Me?
Can we hear? Can
you hear me?
I can hear you. Can we perhaps have you on screen as well? One of our questions that came in regarding the points that you made was, could you perhaps develop on how, on the examples, give us examples perhaps on how the citizen media and investigative journalism, how this can effectively challenge the state of affairs, and just develop on that point that you made in the 7 proposals. Thank you.
There are several strategies to reduce looting, corruption, and financial crime in particular. One is transparency, and transparency is not only for government and budget, it's also for the complete society or the whole society, or the society as a whole. So the civic society plays a great role in checking and balances, providing checks and balances to transparency and appropriation of the wealth. It's obvious that, for instance, where we have a strong citizen media, and not only a media which belongs, like in Europe or elsewhere in the US or in Australia, to large financial oligarchies or groups, citizen-based media made by citizens or NGOs or religious groups sometimes may also contribute to increase the transparency. And we've seen that in Senegal, for instance, when we had the transition from an autocratic government to the new government. The revolution is or was that the results of the election were known to the public before the state could publish them. This was only thanks to the GSM mobile phone and short text messages circulating all over Senegal and publishing the results before in each district, each big town, each department, each region, before the government could even compile them. So the government was forced more or less to acknowledge these results, which were the legitimate results. If we take the example of Nigeria, we have a few citizen-based platforms. We have also in Kenya, we have in Rwanda, and we have a few in South Africa. In the Maghreb, they are non-existent, I must say. And in Central Africa, because of the autocratic style of government, citizen-based platform or media are not allowed. So this contributes to increase the transparency and also giving a counter opinion based on investigation. We've seen, for instance, in the case of the Panama paper or the LuxLeaks, that investigative journalism was very efficient. It increased transparency. It mobilized new actors in the civic society, not only the usual NGOs or international associations such as Transparency International or the others. And it also mobilized a new initiative, even private initiative, which means enterprises.
All right, thank you for that comment. And we have more questions for you, but I think what I will do is I will put some of the questions to the other speakers. Oniyari, there were some questions for you, and I would like to bring you forth at this point. One of them was about, sorry, forgive me. In what ways could governance in Africa solve because you gave the example of the current pandemic that we're going through. So in what ways could better governance in Africa solve the crisis, the COVID crisis, as you mentioned it very briefly, but if you could perhaps expand on that. One of our attendees put that question. Dr. Oniyari, the floor is yours. I would give you 2 to 3 minutes to answer this if you can. You're on mute, Dr. Oniyari. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question from one of our audience. We are saying that are we prepared?
Sorry?
Where you know under the Abuja Declaration, it is said that more than 15% of our budget should be put on health.
Yes.
How many African countries have implemented on that? Nothing.
Exactly.
So what we are trying to say that I talked about involving people. I talk about 1.2 billion Africans, 1.2 billion solutions. So in this pandemic, we were here prepared. It is a pandemic which has come, but I want to thank God that He has supported us and helped the African people, as it was self-proclaimed by the prophets of doom, the likes of the Bill Gates, because they said that we are going to see dead bodies littered in the streets of Africa. It has not happened, and it will never happen because God is on our side. But we are asking the African people, involve your people. Ask them, let us try to find out what are some of the problems which are facing us. Involve people. That is public participation. Inform them.
Absolutely.
Let us have an engagement, a conversation. Let us have a debate with the ultimate goal of reaching a consensus and moving forward. And there's one of our listeners who was asked about United Nations, World Bank, and IMF. Are they having the extension of embarrassing tendencies, or they are having systematic routing of our resources? I talked about Western Sahara. A resolution was done in 1991 of going for a referendum to determine now they want to be 30 years, and this United Nations, which has passed with a special envoy. Why don't we have a referendum in that area? What would we see? It is the resources of Western Sahara which is being routed. The precious minerals like phosphates, which is going to United States of America and Canada. The fishing at the Canary Islands, which is being taken to European Union. So these things, we have to be very clear that if African, we don't come together. Organizing, I said we stop, but we start organizing. You talk about World Bank and IMF. Let me just give Kenya as a case study. We complain and give signatures telling the International Monetary Fund, don't give the government of Kenya. We are burdened with debts. because the money which you give, it is being rooted. Did they listen to us? They went ahead and gave out the money. So the African people, nobody from outside, whether United Nations, whether World Bank, whether IMF, they want to. Let me tell you, like Kenya, the debts we have incurred, we will pay for almost 100 years when we are gone. Why do we want to burden the nation over the money which we have taken not to develop our country, but which has gone to individual people's pocket? That from where I sit, nobody will change Africa, my dear sisters and my brothers and listeners and well wishers. We must come forward and take this bull by their horns. What's happening like Nigeria? Nigeria is moving towards a failed state with a population of 2 million people. See what's happening in Biafra. I have talked about Boko Haram. Our women and children are not safe, and the United Nations is there. The African Union talks about peace and security. The United Nations talks about peace and security. But the women in Boko Haram and Sahara region cannot be able to enjoy
Absolutely
peace. So nobody
yes.
will come to talk to us. Even this pandemic, we are left on our own. In the West, they are doing vaccinations. And those vaccines come to the continent of Africa. How many people have been vaccinated in the continent of Africa? Are we prepared? Do we have those kind of resources? May God have mercy on us.
Thank you, Dr. Oniyari, for that. I think I get your point, and I think this might be linked to the next question that we have for Dr. Nweke. One of the comments that we had earlier in our last session, which was on Black and economic power in the modern world, was talking about the power that we have as a community. And you specifically zoned in on youth in your comment. And there are two questions I'd like to put to you. The first one is from the audience, and that said, do you think our youth population should extend their knowledge to other foreign countries to become an asset? And I think that addresses the concern of the brain drain, because a lot of our population either gets educated abroad or doesn't come, or gets educated like on the continent and then moves abroad for better economic perspective. What is your perspective on that issue?
Yes, thank you. Very pertinent question. Migration is as old as the world. And, I represent the view that, as much information as possible should be out there about migration in terms of opportunities out to where you are migrating to, vis-a-vis the place, you are actually going away from. I do not believe that young African youths should be, deterred from migrating because of the perception that it would drain the brain, of Africa. I think I should leave it, with the youth to make that decision themselves. What is required is for purposeful African governments to give out as much information as possible, but also to create opportunities, for Africans, young Africans right in Africa. Now, a situation where work permits are given for specific roles outside the continent. I will not advise any young person not to take such opportunities if it will enhance their profession. And let's not forget as well that when these people migrate, they also, contribute in the economic development of the continent. Some actually return back, bringing back, knowledge, skills, and so on and so forth. So I'm rather flexible about it. While I will not actively promote, migration for professional purposes, I will not, deter people from, migrating for professional purposes if that's what they want, as long as it is done legally and as long as they are doing that based on solid information.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Nweke. I had another question for you, but I think I'll go back to our first speaker, Mr. Gaya. There's another question that was put to you from the audience regarding the 7 proposals that you had identified. Is Mr. Gaya here? Mr. Jean-Louis?
Demarais.
Yes,
Voilà.
I can hear you. All right, so it's regarding the 7 proposals that you identified in your presentation.
Yes.
How do they interrelate, and also looking at how, if there is already corruption that is targeting one of these solutions. For example, there was one that you identified at the individual level, which is voting, the fact that populations need to engage in voting, go out and vote. What if corruption attacks that concept? How are people sure that their vote is going to be represented, that the election is not going to be stolen, in between air quotes? How, and also the other question was, how do the 7 proposals interrelate?
Okay, the approach to curtailing illicit financial flows cannot be addressing only one cause or only one vehicle of the flow. The outflow is huge and it has multiple factors. So to reduce the flow, we need a systemic approach which addresses the demand for corruption as well as the offer. The offer is lack of transparency in the countries, a lack of transparency in the public spending, lack of transparency in the procurement process, lack of transparency in registering companies or corporate vehicles where that allow corruption and financial crime to happen. So these are the offer side of corruption or financial crime, if I may say. Now there is the demand side, that foreign companies or local and foreign companies together, because they have the same interest in committing the crime, may associate to or be complicit in demanding or offering illicit solution to the business. Whether we should wait for complete electoral transparency and accountability to start addressing corruption and financial crime, for me, is not perhaps the right answer. It goes together, I agree. It should be enhanced together, and it should perhaps be counting on what I've indicated before, which is the digital communication and the communication and the citizen-based media will increase the transparency in elections and the accountability. As I indicated, that was the case in Senegal. We've seen it in other countries as well, in Africa or in Maghreb, for instance, where local election scrutators or local election monitors, which do not belong to the international community and do not belong to the National Election Commission, do monitor the election and publishes the results before they are published by the state or the Ministry of Interior or the National Election Agency. We've seen that in Ivory Coast to some extent. It was derailed. This was because of the military invading the National Election Commission. I cannot say start one and then number 6 or number 7 will follow. I think it's a systemic approach. We need to do everything. And as I said, there is an individual part to play, which is the voting, the political participation and the registration, as well as a systemic approach, which is for the civic society and for government itself, and also for international community to play its role. But what I believe, and that was my last slide, I didn't show that the human spirit is far stronger than any organization or government. This is the word of a well-known musician called Fela Nicola Pukuti, who himself embodied the fact that you can fight government. Okay, you don't win at all in all cases, but you can fight, and the population will support you. And we've seen that in Nigeria, we've seen that in Kenya, we've seen that in South Africa, and we've seen that in Northern Africa as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gaya. I think this is coming from the audience. This was put in the chat or in the Q&A. I'm not too sure. And this was a remark on something that you had said, which said, you said Africa and Africans are not poor, but rather the leaders are because of their ineptitude and poor leadership. What is your view on what the Nigerian Indigenous Nationalities Alliance for Self-Determination is doing, if you have a view, and if you'd like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you, McDonald. Well, I cannot claim to know very much about NINAS and what they, stand for. Of course, I can't claim ignorance of their existence, either. Now, generally speaking, I believe that as far as Nigeria is concerned, the 1999 constitution upon which the country is being run and has been run for a very, very long time is defective. Now, I do not know that even those in government today whose task and responsibility it is to ensure that the country is governed on the basis of the 1999 constitution would contest the fact that that constitution is defective. Now, there are two blocks. One block is saying, the issues with that constitution are not, cannot be amended. And so for that reason, let the country disintegrate, let everyone go their way. On the other hand, you have people who are saying that, no, you can't just throw everything away. I mean, like the analogy of a marriage that lasted 70 years, they asked the man, what is the secret behind it? He said, well, in our time, when things get broken, we fix it. These days, when things get broken, people just get rid of them. So we need to be careful that we don't fall into that kind of situation. At least there should be very serious attempts to actually, reform that constitution, restructure the country. I mean, it's got to be given very, very genuine, chance of succeeding. It is only after that has been tried and, it turns out unsuccessful that the issue of, possible disintegration, could come in. But putting it in the forefront is not, is not something that should be supported. Yes, my statement about poverty in Africa is that Africa and Africans aren't poor. Mm-hmm. What we have is poor leadership.
Yes.
So it is a poor leadership that is actually making Africa to be resource, strived, and that should change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wiki. I think I'm going to take our last question of the day for Dr. Oniyari, and then I will be wrapping it up because we're already 6 minutes over time. I would like to thank our attendees for bearing with us so far. So Dr. Oniyari, we had a question from the audience, not too sure who, which was, my question is, the membership of sub-Saharan African countries to Western crafted institutions such as the UN, the World Bank, IMF, etc., adding any value to our economic growth, or is it a continuation of their imperialism and systematic looting of African natural resources and arming of African bandits with sophisticated Western manufactured weapons?
Thank you. I think I answered it, but since I think I answered, but since you have given me time, maybe perhaps to
2 minutes
more. What I want to say is this, that who are the actors of the United Nations, World Bank, and IMF? In the United Nations, we are only non-voting members. There are those countries which has got veto powers, you know who they are. World Bank, look at the structure adjustment programs which came to the continent of Africa during the 1990s, which they ensure that we privatize our parastatos at the time when our people are poor. Who bought those parastatos? I gave a case about IMF where my fellow Kenyans were able to petition to IMF that don't give more money to the government of Kenya because all the money which you give is rooted and it's not put in good practice. In fact, they went ahead and giving that money very fast. So it is not for the interest for the African people.
Yes.
The speakers before, we have said all the money which has been rooted from the continent of Africa, where is it banked? Where are the offshore accounts? Are they in the continent of Africa? And they know, as you do, that this money has been rooted at the continent of Africa. Why don't they return it? So this kind of money from World Bank and IMF, they are putting Africa in debt, and that's the new neocolonialism, that when we are not able to give back the money, they will be able to dictate to us, do this, do this, do that. This is where we are heading to. So the African people, it is high time that we have this kind of conversation, engagement, discussions, that it is us to represent the continent of Africa. Our founding fathers did it, and we can do it in our lifetime. And even if we don't do it, we can be able to under the pattern of the African people and saying that let us protect the African dignity. The speakers before might say that yes, we can allow our people to go to the West, but how do you allow the PhD guys to go to America or other countries to go and be shoe shiners? Nweka, are you serious? Who have created these conditions that the African people, we cannot be able to manage our resources. We cannot create opportunities. See the African, the young women, people going to the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. See how they are being mistreated and massacred. So what we are trying to say, the African leaders, and if you are listening to me, let us put our acts together. We are a shining continent. We can do things better for the good of Africa. I believe and I'm sure.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Oniyari. So I think what has come out of this session today on shedding